We always came up here in early September. Me, Mark, and Denny. Same lake, same worn-down pier, same three-man tent with the broken zipper. It was our way of saying summer wasn't over yet. This year, though, something was off from the first morning. The fish were biting like crazy, almost too good to be true. We dropped our lines near the northern bend where the shore curved into a shady inlet, and within minutes we had a bucket full of plump perch and 2 huge pike. Mark whistled and said it was the best damn spot in 10 years. That night we fried the smaller catch over the campfire, but as soon as we bit in, the taste hit us metallic, bitter, almost rotten. Denny spat his out and immediately gagged. I tried to laugh it off, saying it might have just been the oil, but the smell coming from the rest of the fish was unmistakable. It wasn't just bad, it was wrong. By morning, Denny had a fever. Said he felt like his stomach was twisting into a knot. Mark joked that he probably swallowed a parasite, but I could tell he was worried. We packed the rest of the fish into a cooler and planned to head into town to get Denny checked out. But Mark had another idea. He wanted to go back to the spot just for a few casts, he said. Something about the fish didn't sit right with him either. Not the biting, not the smell. So we launched the boat again and headed to the same bend, only this time with a waterproof camera and a weighted rope. What we saw when we lowered the camera made my blood go cold. About 15 feet down, barely visible in the silty water, was a square shape, concrete, big, and around it long iron hooks. Not fishing hooks, hooks like you'd see in a slaughterhouse. Mark stared at the screen, his mouth slightly open. "Someone's dumping something here," he muttered. "Something heavy." I didn't want to believe it, but deep down I knew he was right. This wasn't about bad fish or spoiled bait. Something was tainting that water, and we had just eaten from it. We hauled the camera back in silence, and for a long while none of us said a word. And then Mark asked, "You think it's still down there?" We didn't sleep much that night. Even the crackling fire seemed muted, as if it too sensed something was off. Denny lay on his cot, pale and sweating. Every few minutes he'd murmur about a twisting pain in his gut. I slid over to hand him a bottle of water and noticed his shaking grip. It wasn't from cold. Morning light revealed more. My hands felt oddly heavy as I packed our gear. The cooler with the remaining fish sat in the corner, its lid half ajar, exuding that same rotting stench. I wanted to pitch it into the lake, but I feared what might happen if we ate any more. Mark climbed into the boat first. Unlike us, he carried a strange energy, restless curiosity, maybe even defiance. He'd refused to let the camera go after that shape, the concrete slab and the iron hooks. That image haunted him, as it haunted me. We owed it to Denny to find out exactly what lay beneath. We set out before dawn. The lake was glassy, the horizon tinged with pale gold. As we crossed the open water, I kept my gaze fixed on the receding shoreline, thinking about the bite of those fish, the rot in their flesh. Every gentle lap against the hull sounded like a hiss of warning. At the bend, we pulled the camera again. Mark tossed the weighted line into the same place. The rope slipped through his gloved fingers with a soft splash. We let it descend slowly, eyes glued to the monitor. The concrete shape grew clearer, a rectangular slab 6 feet long, encrusted with algae. Then came the hooks, 10, maybe 12 of them long, thick, stained a dark rust. They arced outward from the slab like grotesque ribs. disappearing into the murky sand. Mark tipped his head. Who would do this? I couldn't answer. No one in their right mind would repossess such an object mid-lake without a reason. This went beyond clandestine dumping. It felt ritualistic, and the lake once a sanctuary felt contaminated, betrayed. We hauled the rig back aboard and floated in tense silence. Denny's cough rasped from the stern. His fever had climbed higher. We argued briefly, more in frustration than hope. Should we go for help now or investigate one more time? Mark's eyes, dark with adrenaline, voted for one more dive. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We suited up in wetsuits and straps, the heavy dive pack pressing against my shoulders. Mark handed me a waterproof flashlight. Its beam cut a pale circle in the water. I slipped in first. The surface closed above me with a dull thud, and I kicked down, looking for that block. Cold seeped through my wetsuit, and my lungs burned as I descended. At 15 feet, the slab emerged in my flashlight's glow. I hovered there, watching silt drift like ghosts. The hooks seemed to shiver in the current. I reached out, hesitating. The metal was sharp, jagged at the ends. Rust flakes crumbled under my gloved hand. My light swept over the slab's surface, and I saw faint marking scratches that looked like letters, worn nearly smooth by algae and time. Something scraped behind me. I spun, flashlight swinging. Nothing. My heart pounded so loud I could hear it in my ears. Then a breath, or what sounded like one, cold and raspy. I froze. The darkness shifted. I kicked upward without waiting for a second thought, ripping toward the surface. My vision blurred, lungs screaming. I broke through the mirror of the water, gasping and coughing. Mark was at the bow, pulling off his mask. "What happened?" he asked, voice urgent. I pointed back at the lake. "Something's down there. That slab, someone marked it, and I thought I heard." My voice trailed off as I saw Denny slumped over the edge of the boat, convulsing. Mark shouted his name and grabbed him. I knelt, shaking the cooler lid closed, sealing away the stench. My mind raced. That slab, those hooks, they weren't just metal. They anchored something, old guilt, concealed crimes, and somehow the tainted fish were its mouthpiece. I pulled off my mask and stared at the lake's calm surface. The early morning sun glinted on the water, making it look harmless, beautiful. Then a dark ripple spread from the bend, as if something had shifted beneath. We had to get out of there, fast, but I couldn't shake the thought. What if it was already too late? We didn't waste a second. Mark lifted Denny into the boat, and I cut the engine's ignition with shaking fingers. The lake's gentle waves felt like taunts as we sped back to shore, leaving our dive gear trailing in the oily wake. Denny's breaths were shallow gasps. His skin had gone pale enough to match the underbellies of the pike that poisoned us. At the ranger station, we begged them for help. An ambulance arrived minutes later, lights pulsing red against the dawn sky. I watched Denny loaded onto a stretcher, Mark clutching his shoulder, and realized neither of us would eat fish again, nor trust that lake's placid surface. Later that afternoon, while police and environmental inspectors took samples from the water, Mark and I sat in the empty pier shack, sifting through his phone footage. Frame by frame, we circled that concrete slab. The rusted hooks, 12 in total, curved like the ribs of some trapped leviathan. One shot showed a jagged edge glinting under silt. Closer inspection revealed lettering, half erased, FRS 1963. A call to the county archives confirmed our fears. A freighter barge had sunk in 1963 after colliding with an uncharted shoal just off the bend. Among its cargo, illegally stored scrap metal, including slaughterhouse equipment seized years earlier from a bankrupt meat processor. The hooks were never salvaged, and the concrete block was part of an experimental mooring platform abandoned when the project was shelved. Over decades, the metal had corroded, leaching toxic iron compounds and industrial byproducts into the water. It wasn't supernatural. It was slow poisoning, a chemical legacy masquerading as a fisherman's fortune. The pike and perch had filtered the contamination in their flesh. We'd eaten it. Then he spent 3 days in the hospital under intravenous fluids and activated charcoal. He recovered, but I saw the way he flinched at every fish-shaped shadow, the tremor in his hands when he tried to lift a glass. Mark and I went back to the bend once more, standing at water's edge as dusk fell. The lake looked unchanged, smooth, innocent, but we knew better. As we walked away, our boots crunching on wet gravel, a single ripple formed beside the pier post, then faded. The lake kept its secrets below the surface, but for us, the truth would never settle quietly. I arrived in the village just as the sun dropped behind the eastern ridges, spilling copper light across the lake. The gravel road into town ended at a single dirt parking lot where half a dozen pickup trucks and beat-up sedans sat locked and idle. I slid my backpack off my shoulders, feeling the snap of a lone wind-blown reed against my calf, and glanced at the water. It was still glassy like polished obsidian, and already dotted with the silhouettes of fishermen casting lines from a long, weathered wooden pier. The village itself was quiet, full of shuttered windows and front porches, strewn with empty pails and nets. A kerosene lamp burned in the only open window of a small bait and tackle shop. An old man sat behind the counter, polishing hooks by its amber glow. His hands were crooked like gnarled roots, and his eyes were sharp as flint. "New face," he said without looking up. His voice rasped as though unused. "Stick to the old pier. That's where the fish still bite true." I forced a polite nod and handed him bills for 2 spools of monofilament line and a box of razor-sharp treble hooks. He wrapped them in yellowed newspaper, sealed with spit, and slid the package across the counter. "No, thank you." No smile. I set up camp at the far end of the pier, careful to leave my gear just out of reach of the lapping waves. My tent was a battered 2-man tarp shelter, zipped tight against insects. I unpacked my rod, tied the new line on, and fixed a small lead weight just above the hooks. The air smelled of wet wood and fallen leaves, an autumn scent, despite the calendar still reading August. A lone loon cried in the distance. I sat cross-legged on the pier's edge and cast my line toward the deepest water. Ripples spread outward, carrying tiny flecks of sunlight as they dissolved. Minutes passed. No bite. I tried again, moving a few feet along the railing. Still nothing. The other fishermen, dozens of them, had gathered nearer the shoreline, voices drifting through the air like stray threads. But the old man's warning kept me away from the crowd. On my 3rd cast, the line quivered. Excitement lanced through me as I set the hook and waited. A solid tug of fish. I cranked the reel, pulling in what looked like a medium-sized perch. Silver sides, dark stripes. I gripped it firmly, unhooked it, and dropped it into my bucket. The second catch came half an hour later, a fat pike nearly 2 feet long. Its teeth glinted ominously, but it thrashed less than I expected. I suspected the water there was colder, stagnant. Still, I felt a surge of satisfaction. Just one more for a morning meal. I reeled again. This time the line went slack, then snagged something heavy. My rod bucked. I fought the weight, heart pounding. Slowly I hauled in what I assumed was a monstrous fish, but instead, a thick roll of burlap emerged, trailing half-buried under the murky surface. Water seeped through the coarse fabric, darkening it to charcoal gray. Intrigued and unsettled, I lifted it aboard. Unwrapping the layers revealed nothing but a twisted strip of sackcloth. There were no fish, no debris, only this ragged, waterlogged ribbon. One end was stained a deep rust brown. Sewn to it was a metal tag, rectangular and battered by age. 3 characters were engraved, HLD-7. The numbers and letters were hand-stamped, uneven and beaten deep. Odd. I flipped it over, half expecting more tags or a clue, but the reverse was blank. A cold knot grew in my stomach. Why would someone sink burlap with a metal tag? Who or what did HLD-7 refer to? Across the lake, the fisherman had vanished. The lamps in the bait shop blinked out. A breeze picked up, rippling the water with restless patterns. As I knelt to stuff the strip into my tackle box, I noticed a single footprint stamped in the wet sand by the pier fresh. Human, but belonging to no one I could see. It pointed toward shore, then faded into the mud. I shivered and coaxed the boat into the inky water, careful not to jostle my new prize. The oars moved with a hollow echo under the dim sky. Every creak of the wood sounded like a warning. As the shore lights grew closer, I wrapped the burlap strip in a plastic bag and stuffed it under the passenger seat. The lake looked innocent in the fading light, but I felt certain that beneath its calm surface lay something old, hidden, and dangerous. I didn't sleep that night. Too many questions tumbled through my mind. Whose burlap was that? What did HLD-7 mean? And why had the fisherman disappeared so abruptly? At 2 a.m. my phone buzzed random notification that the power was cut at the old pier. I woke with a start, staring at the map on screen. The marker blinked ominously. You are here. I realized then that I had stumbled onto something the village didn't want strangers uncovering, and I had no choice but to go back. Sleep eluded me. I sat in the car's driver's seat long after midnight, staring at the plastic bag holding the burlap strip and its metal tag, HLD-7. My breath fogged the window as a lone loon called from the water, a hollow note that shivered down my spine. At 2 a.m, a faint hiss awakened me, the soft, rasping sound of fishing line being drawn across a blade. Heart hammering, I grabbed my flashlight and stepped into the night air. The lake was black glass, the pier empty. I crossed the narrow strip of gravel to my car and froze. My fishing line, coiled on the hood, was pulled tight toward the water's edge. I carefully unwound it, knots slick with dew, and followed the taut line to the pier. No footprints disturbed the gravel. No one stood there. Just a rope disappearing into the inky water. Shaking, I returned to the car. Inside, I found the metal tag missing from the burlap. In its place lay a single, fresh hook, identical to those I'd bought and bedded in the empty bag. Its barbs glistened wet and ominous. Dawn arrived in silver streaks, and I drove into the village. The bait shop was open again, its lamp warm in the window. I clutched the hooked bag in my hand and entered. The old man looked up. His eyes glinted. "You fished the wrong spot last night," he said, voice low. "New pier. Folks don't go near the old one at night." "Someone was here," I whispered, showing him the hook. He sighed and set down his pliers. "You found a cut line, the one that marks a trap. HLD7 isn't just a tag, it's a warning." I bristled. "Warning of what?" He shook his head. "Best you stick to the old pier by daylight and leave HLD7 in the past." I left the shop, but the hook burned in my palm. All morning I tried to research the Tag County records, fishing licenses, even old newspapers, but came up with nothing. HLD turned up only a defunct barge company from the 50s. 7 could be anything. That night I parked again near the old pier, determined to get answers. My rod leaned against the car. The hook, wrapped in cloth, lay on the dash. I waited past midnight. At exactly 2 a.m., the line went taut again. I grabbed it, reeling in slowly. My flashlight cut a path toward the water. The rope led me out onto the pier. Midway across, I stopped. Below, a dark shape lingered. I lowered a small camera on a rope. Through the grainy screen, I saw a submerged wooden framework, like a battered crate, but something moved within. A pale hand, skinny as driftwood, wrapped around the corner beam and slipped away as quickly as it appeared. I jerked the camera back. My heart pounded so hard, I thought it might shatter my ribs. The footage showed nothing but ripples. I raced to the car. The cloth-wrapped hook had vanished from the dash. Instead, on the passenger seat, lay a single word scrawled in mud: "Stay." I burned the camera. I locked my door and drove through the night, never looking back. But every time the clock ticks past 2 a.m., I feel the rope tighten around my mind, and I wonder who or what wants me to stay away from that old, haunted pier. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pale hand, its fingers curling around the rotting wood. At dawn, I pulled off the road toward the highway, but my car shuddered and died halfway up a gentle grade. The dashboard lights flickered, then went dark. I tried the key again. Nothing. I climbed out and popped the hood. Everything looked normal. Belts in place, battery connections tight. The engine bay smelled faintly of stale fish and oil. I muttered a curse and reached for my phone to call for help, then remembered I'd left it charging at the bait shop. Step by step, I walked back down the narrow tarmac toward the village. The morning air was cool, but a bead of sweat traced down my spine. My footsteps echoed oddly in the hush. When I neared the old pier parking lot, I saw 2 men leaning against a battered pickup sun-bleached and rusted. Their caps pulled low, they watched me approach in silence. "Car troubles?" one asked, voice low. I nodded. "Battery died, can't figure why." He spat on the gravel. "You been fishing near the old pier after dark?" I hesitated. I had to know what that hand was. He glanced at his companion. Neither said another word. "Look," I said, "I've got this." I opened my jacket and produced the mud-streaked cloth from my inner pocket. The last fragment marked HLD7. Their eyes flicked to it. "Where'd you get that?" The taller man asked. "From the lake," I said. "Someone's trapping, snaring people in the water. I saw it myself. They exchanged looks. The shorter one shoved the cloth back into my hand. You don't want to know more. That pier, it's private. No one sells fish from there. No one touches its water. You caught your warning, friend, now heed it. I opened my mouth to argue, but the taller man raised a hand. We've been here since before you were born. The lake's got its rules. You broke them. They pushed me toward the pickup. The door swung open. Inside on the passenger seat was my GPS unit screensaver, still glowing with our fishing route last night. I reached for it reflexively. The tall man pulled it just out of reach. Then he climbed in, slamming the door. The shorter man said, "Car's fine. Leave it here." He pointed at the engine. "If you really want to go, walk." I swallowed hard. My mind raced. File police report? Would they believe I fished with ghosts? I slipped the cloth into my jacket and turned. The ring of keys, still in the ignition, mocked me. I took 2 paces, then stopped. Their pickup idled, engine quietly throbbing. I turned back. They were both staring at me, expressionless. "Fine," I said. "I'm going." I walked past the pier, breathing ragged. Gulls wheeled overhead, calling out like distant alarms. Behind me, the pickup followed at the edge of the lot until I ducked behind a stand of pines. By the time I reached the main road, it was gone. I called a tow truck from the highway payphone. When the tow driver arrived, I told him my car died. He offered to look under the hood. I shut the door firmly. As we drove away, I glanced back at the pier's jutting silhouette. The early sun glinted on the water, making it look harmless once more. I kept reminding myself, no hand, no hooks, no burlap. Just an old legend the villagers passed down. But I've never been so sure of an ending. Now, every once in a while, when fog drifts over the highway, I catch a glimpse of that old pier in the distance. I clutch my jacket pocket where the final scrap of burlap remains, and I realize the warning wasn't just to stay away. It was to remember. Because some catches are meant to hold on long after you think you've let them go.